Does my mic work? Yeah. All right. Okay, it's a great pleasure to introduce today to Scott Parazynski. He got his medical degree from Stanford University with a focus on human spaceflight. While medical school, Dr. Parazynski also competed for the United States luge team. He ended up going to the Winter Olympics in 1988 as a coach of the Philippines. As if that's not enough, he also spent over 8 weeks in space, including 47 hours of spacewalks. He also climbed numerous mountains, including Mount Everest, basically twice. And he's here today to talk about his new book called The Sky Below, where he talks about all his endeavors. Please welcome Scott to the stage.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Daphne.
Hey, Scott.
How are you?
Good. All right. So, Scott, you seem like a very competitive astronaut. Okay, you've not just flown in space. You've also performed numerous spacewalks.
Yep.
How can you prepare for these things, and how do you prepare for the fact that something can go wrong?
Well, I think the best preparation, the best way to deal with jitters is to be thoroughly prepared and to really understand the risks that are out there. So preparing for a spacewalk, it's really understanding not just how things are supposed to work, but how they might break. And invariably, things do break. And in fact, one of my mentors, Story Musgrave, said, the only thing expected about EVA, which basically stands for extravehicular activity or spacewalking, the only thing expected about EVA is the unexpected. So really understanding how things might break, and then having a kind of a hip pocket procedure for what you might do if they inevitably do go wrong.
What do you mean by a hip pocket procedure?
Well, just kind of thinking about what you might do if plan A, B, or C didn't work. You've got to have just a notion of what plan D might look like. So if you really understand how things, an example that I talk about in my book, but understanding the inner workings of the Hubble Space Telescope, it's not just the photons from the stars that get gathered in the mirror, but it's the electrons and the ones and zeros of the data and the cooling systems of the telescope. Understanding how that is all assembled, and then if part A breaks and then part B breaks, how you might have a fighting chance to fix it.
So you dedicated your book to a very special mission that you were very actively part of, STS-120.
Right.
Can you explain, first of all, why was the mission so special, and what was your role, and why did you dedicate the book to it?
Well, I was the lead spacewalker on this really extraordinary mission to the International Space Station. It was a very complex mission even before we launched. It was to install a new interconnecting node to the space station called Harmony that would allow European and Japanese modules to plug in. But then we're also going to be relocating a large solar array truss from the top of the space station and putting it out at the very end. And all this was really kind of sketchy because this solar panel platform had been up there for 8 years already. We didn't know if we could even unbolt the thing and allow us to relocate it and unfurl these solar panels again. So it started out, even before flight, as a really challenging mission. But when we got up into space and we had relocated the solar truss, the panel actually began to rip apart. And you might think, well, what's the big deal? Well, it was a limp noodle out there, and if we were to undock the space shuttle at that point, we might actually damage the space shuttle or space station. We could have a really horrible situation on our hands. So people worked around the clock for 72 hours. It was a really Apollo 13 type moment when people had to figure out what we could do with the supplies we had on board the space shuttle space station complex. And we couldn't go down to Home Depot and get a solar array repair kit. We had to build it with the things we had on board. And it was just brilliant. And we had to accept a higher level of risk than we ordinarily would. We never want to get anywhere near a live solar panel up in space. It's still generating current even in orbital night. Yeah, here's the tear of the solar panel that we had to go out and fix. And it was at the very tip of the space station, further than we'd ever ventured before from the safety of our airlock. And so we had to invent all these new tools and procedures and robotic trajectories, and everyone in the entire NASA team was performing at their absolute most brilliant perfection. And so I never thought that the team got the credit that they were due, and I really wanted to celebrate their efforts. So that's why I dedicated the book to them.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So you grew up with very adventurous parents, okay, from moving from one place to the other. Your dad even worked for Boeing, and you lived in Seattle for a while. So How did your upbringing influence your ambition to work for NASA?
Well, being basically on the front row of the space program as a little kid, I saw Apollo 9 from the beach in Cocoa Beach, Florida. My dad was a rocket scientist who was engaged in the program, and in fact, in those days, time would actually stop. They would actually wheel a big tube TV into the classroom, and everybody, all the students in the class would watch the launches. And so it was every kid in my generation wanted to be an astronaut when we grew up, and I just kind of never grew out of it, I suppose. But yeah, my parents were very adventurous. We lived overseas for quite a bit of my upbringing. I spent some time in West Africa and in the Middle East, and graduated from high school in Athens, Greece. So I really gained an appreciation of people first and foremost. It's the people that you meet, the opportunities that you take, not just the kind of formal classroom education that you receive that really shapes who you are and gives you your greatest insights in life, I think.
Yeah. You were John Glenn's personal physician in space, so that must have been like a dream come true. Can you explain why it was so special, and what are your special moments with John Glenn on the space?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I'm sure everyone has heard the name John Glenn. He was our very first American to orbit the Earth. He was a Mercury astronaut, and in, I guess, February of 1962, he orbited the Earth for the very first time. It was a very harrowing mission. He narrowly survived the mission, actually. It's quite a story worth investigating if you haven't read about him. But for me, when he came back to fly in space at age 77, I mean, it was a dream come true. It's like getting to play basketball with Michael Jordan or soccer with Pele, or doing astrophysics with Albert Einstein. To get a chance to be in the game with the greatest hero of all in spaceflight. So it was really a wonderful life experience to get to know him personally, not just as a colleague, but as a great friend. And unfortunately, we lost him last December. He passed at age 95, but he was incredibly, with it, sharp as a tack until age 95.
Yeah, what a wonderful age.
Yeah.
So you applied your medical knowledge during your NASA career, and you're a big advocate for innovation. Mm-hmm. What innovative concepts did you work on?
Well, so everything that is done in an extreme environment has to be rethought. Life and science and engineering just behave differently in the weightlessness of space, or in other extreme environments underneath our oceans, or up on high mountains. And so I love going to these extreme environments and using them as sort of a catalyst for innovation. But perhaps the area where I'm most proud of being an innovator is in the aftermath of the Space Shuttle Columbia tragedy. You may recall we lost just an amazingly wonderful crew on STS-107. They had performed this flawless 16-day flight, and just 16 minutes before landing, tragically they perished because there had been a breach in the wing of their space shuttle. And I could talk a whole hour on all that, but we had to figure out a way to make it safe again. And so it was really galvanizing for the whole NASA team to figure out, first off, what had happened, and then, by God, never let it happen again. And my role after the Space Shuttle Columbia accident was as the lead spacewalker, figuring out a way to go out on spacewalks and repair a space shuttle where it was never meant to be visited. We call it spacewalking, but really it's space crawling. That doesn't sound very cool, though. Space crawling, out in the weightlessness of space, you're floating. And so we actually use our handrails to kind of crawl around, or we have robotic arms that will take us into different positions. But there's never any intent to visit the bottom of the space shuttle or the wing of the space shuttle, because, why would you ever want to go out there? Well, we needed to get there, so we had to invent new tools and techniques and materials to basically patch up damaged tiles should another accident happen again. And so it's probably my most creative period of life, because every day we're working on new procedures, developing new materials and new tools to do that work.
Yeah, and besides all those amazing missions, you've also climbed the craziest mountains. You're the only person on the planet who's ever stood on the tallest mountain of the world, and has been in space. I believe you climbed all the 14ers in Colorado. Is it 58 or 59?
59.
59
yeah.
14ers. You conquered Aconcagua, Mount Everest, dove in the world's highest lake. So what's left to explore? What's next?
You know, my bucket list has never been fuller. And people ask me this question sometimes, and I find it kind of curious because, you know, the world is so vast and there's so many different places to go visit. And it doesn't have to be an extreme environment to be fascinating in it. You know, there are places that we may have visited thousands of times, but we can still learn by going there. And, you know, I'm so excited to be living in this day and age where so many different technologies are now available to us. Big data analytics and new sensor technologies, new materials. This is really a heyday of innovation that we live in. Forgetting all the stuff that happens in 1600 Pennsylvania and elsewhere, but you know, set politics aside, it's really an exciting time in life, I think. And so I guess right now I'm really interested in our oceans. A friend of mine, his name is Phil Newton. He has a company called Newtco, based in Vancouver, Canada. He builds these brilliant vessels that are submersibles and single-person, one-atmospheric dive suits. So he's a passionate diver and explorer himself. And he says that our planet should have been called ocean because 70% of our planet is covered in water. And of course, we live on land and we call it Earth, but it really is a planet of water. And it's a bellwether of what our future may hold, and there's a lot of reason to be concerned. We know more about the surface of Mercury and Venus and Mars than we do of our ocean bottoms, and so to understand what's happening in our oceans is really fundamental.
Maybe you want to tell the public what license you just gained as part of your book of licenses.
Well, I just visited some good friends of mine up in Everett, Washington. There's a wonderful company called OceanGate that builds submersibles. And so they are using these assets to explore our oceans. And in fact, this summer they plan to actually visit the Titanic. And so it'll be the only privately held submersible in the world that could do that. So.
Wow. It's impressive. Okay, so you went up Everest twice?
Well, one time to the top, so.
Right, but the first time you had to turn around 24 hours before reaching the summit. Mm-hmm. Does it mean you don't have summit fever? Because you did come back a year later, right?
Yes, I did.
Maybe you want to explain what happened.
Well, yeah, so I'm really proud of the way I handled myself on Everest. I don't pat myself on the back very often, but you know, I could have had summit fever and pressed a really bad hand and proceeded on to the summit, or tried to get towards the summit with a ruptured disc in my low back. I was at Camp 3 on my summit push, as you said, 24 hours from the summit, when I had excruciating low back pain. I didn't know what was wrong with me at the time, but I knew it was something really serious, and I tried to ice my back down there at camp, and I really considered, well, maybe I can cinch my waist harness down really, really tight like a weightlifter's belt, and maybe I can deal with the pain and I could go for the summit. But I realized that, you know, I'm a dad. I've got 2 wonderful kids and a family and friends back home. Should I risk my own life? And then, more importantly, could I, in good conscience, risk the summit success of my teammates and maybe even their own lives? They would have tried to save me if something really awful happened up higher. So yeah. I turned around. But then I was able to return the following year, having had surgery. And I would say it's one of the most wonderful experiences of my life to actually have that 30 minutes on top of Mount Everest, because I think the things that come hardest for us in life, the things that we really have to fight for the most, mean the most to us. If I had summited that first year, it would have been a wonderful thing, I'm sure. But the fact that I spent 4 months on the side of Mount Everest suffering, and I finally had that 30 minutes of euphoria on top. That was really wonderful.
I can imagine. Plus, in 2009, you brought moon rocks from Apollo 11 mission.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting story behind that, as you explain in your book.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Well, so 2 of my boyhood heroes were Sir Edmund Hillary, who's one of the first 2 to summit Mount Everest in 1953, and Neil Armstrong, who was the very first person to set foot on the moon. And they'd become close friends later in life. They'd actually gone to the North Pole as part of an expedition together. So I really wanted to pay tribute to both of them. Ed had already passed in 2009 when I was going to the mountain, but Neil was alive, and my goal was to actually call Neil on my satellite phone from the top of the world, but my fingers got really cold. Those keys on the satellite phones are really, really tiny, you know, so I didn't do that, but I got special clearance from NASA to borrow an Apollo 11 moon rock, which is really wonderful. And I took this moon rock to the top of the world, and then I brought it back down along with a summit rock from Mount Everest, and I launched that eventually to the International Space Station, where it now resides in the Tranquility module. Of course, the rock came from the Sea of Tranquility. That's where Apollo 11 landed. So it's kind of a special kind of circle there. But that had benefit was about 6 months after the climb, I got this message on Facebook from a woman who I guess had been the person responsible for me borrowing that moon rock. She had chaired a special committee that appropriates lunar materials, typically for scientists. And she thought this was a really strange request, but maybe it would be good PR for NASA. So she and the team agreed to allow it. But ended up that this beautiful, brilliant scientist became my wife. She's actually seated in the front row here. So, Dr. Mina Wadwa. Yeah.
Well, so you've done a lot of stuff. You've been to space, been on mountains. There are some similarities between them, right? You work in very diverse teams, depending on what mission you're going to do. Mm-hmm. How important are team dynamics? What can we learn from that here at Amazon?
So I guess all across my life in the challenging environments where I've worked, the best teams are the most diverse. You know, multidisciplinary teams have the ability to tap into skill sets that are very different. If you have a monolithic team that all thinks alike, looks alike, comes from the same background, you're going to get the same answers all the time, and that doesn't advance things. So on my missions up into space, and then in another position that I held as a chief technology officer at a medical research institute, I really tried to leverage very, very diverse multidisciplinary teams. So in the hospital, it was not just physicians and surgeons, but nurses and technicians and business people and lawyers, material scientists, and so on. The more diversity you can pull into a team, the greater the innovation you can come up with. Because typically, the more mired you are in a particular area, the more you have blinders on for novel solutions.
Can you admit any mistakes you make yourself once in leadership that you wouldn't make again?
Yeah, many. In fact, one of the things that I hope you guys read and enjoy the book. But the reason another reason I wrote the book was to really share my lessons learned. You know, if you just think about people in terms of their successes, it's pretty easy to be, to enjoy success and to kind of revel in that, but it's really a nonlinear path from where you are and where you want to get to. And so for me, I've had many setbacks, both in my own personal health. I've had a couple of life scares, health issues, some family challenges. My daughter is autistic, and she's a wonderful, amazing human being and the light of my life, but there are challenges associated with that as well. And so I wanted to share through my book not just the euphoria moments, but also how you get through the difficult
struggles of life.
Yeah, because everyone has them, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in your book, you also talk about a term, third culture kids.
Yes.
I think a lot of us can actually also relate to that.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you, and how did that change your view on life?
Well, third culture kid, basically, and I think you would be one of those as well, of course, but it's an upbringing in a nation not of our birth. So for me, I ended up, going to junior high school in West Africa and the Middle East, and high school in Europe. So I had some roots back in the United States, but I also had roots in many different places around the world, and so it gave me a strength to meet people and to be adaptable. But I think there are some challenges to it as well. The lack of deep roots in any one place, and some transience there. But overall, I think it's been a great gift.
And I think it's also important who you surround yourself with, right? Because not everyone must have believed in you your whole life. Like, did everyone think you could just become an astronaut or climb Mount Everest? How did you deal with that?
Well, so the way I have always kind of interacted with people is I always look for people who are positive, and I surround myself with positive people and positive energy. And if people are dragging you down, you need to find new friends. No, certainly I sort of kept my ambition to becoming an astronaut kind of secret for quite a while because I thought people would think I was crazy. But yeah.
Yeah, so that's important. And talking about that, so I'm going to read this from my card because your wife is the director of the Center for Meteorite Studies and a professor of geological sciences in the School for Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University. You both spent time in Antarctica. What did you do there? And did you talk about anything else in space together?
Well, so my role at the time was overseeing healthcare for the U.S. Antarctic program. So we send about 3,000 scientists and technicians and staff to the ice. We call it the ice every year, as supported by the U.S. government. And so I did all the screening and provided the healthcare from the comfort of Galveston, Texas. We did a lot of telemedicine from Galveston, Texas, but I had the opportunity to travel a couple of times down to the ice. And Mina has actually taken a couple of trips to Antarctica as well. It's really an extraordinary place to identify and bring back meteorites. These are emissaries from all over the solar system. So there's,
why meteorites?
Well, it's the way the katabatic winds tend to sweep across the ice. It's just a really wonderful place to accumulate these special rocks, and typically there aren't other rocks to confuse you because it's a huge sheet of ice across the majority of the continent. So yeah, if you see a rock, it's probably a meteorite. So not always. But.
Save them all.
Yeah. Collect them all.
You've been everywhere, been to Antarctica, of course. Previously, you expressed you're not a risk taker. Yeah. I think a lot of us wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Why would you say that?
Well, so I really consider myself more a risk manager. So by preparation, by the way that I get ready to go to, inside, I think you may have seen some pictures inside an active volcano or out on a spacewalk or flying in an airplane. If you're very well prepared, you can control a large number of the risks. You can't control them all. On the side of Mount Everest, you can anticipate avalanches, unfortunately, but you can minimize your exposure to them. So we would do everything that we could to minimize our exposures to the biggest risks, and then also to have that plan B, C, and D. I'm really energized by both physical and other types of challenges, but I don't take risk lightly by any means.
So that calculated risk, then you use that exploration for innovation also. And you already mentioned you are now trying to explore the oceans, and you want to give back a message, probably. What is your goal to go to the oceans? Like, what is it that you want to achieve by doing so?
Well, I think bringing awareness to people about the fragility of our planet. As an astronaut, I've been gifted for this amazing view of our planet. And nature, by and large, is absolutely stunningly beautiful. But the scars on our planet, they're all human-made, unfortunately. So there's deforestation in the Amazon basin. You can see jet contrails across the skies. You can see soot. You can very clearly see the Trans-Siberian Railway because of the industrialization along that pathway. Crop circles. You really gain an appreciation of how fragile our planet is, and you want to do what you can to preserve it. And so, so much of our life depends on the health of our oceans. And I'm sure you're aware of the the pollution in our oceans and the Pacific trash islands out there that are really more than an eyesore. They're a real threat to our long-term survival. So.
And assuming that we're all sort of stewards of our own environment, what do you think are the most pressing issues that we should all sort of give back to in the next 5 or so years?
Well, I think that's a really wonderful question, and I think it's probably a personal answer for each of us. I think we're all very, very fortunate to be here today. You guys are in such an exciting company and exciting industries. I know you represent so many different industries, but Amazon is reshaping commerce. It's reshaping the way we read and enjoy books through amazing assets, delivery, the things that you're involved with, even sister companies, expanding our presence in space. So we're all very fortunate to be here and working in the things that we're working on. So I think it's really important to take some responsibility to try and pay it forward. For me, my mantra in life is, all of us fortunate enough to be in healthcare have both an opportunity, but also an obligation to innovate, to try and make things better. And so I try and think about that all the time.
Yeah, and if you talk about an obligation, you also co-founded a company called Blue Marble Exploration. Do you want to talk a bit more about that? And also, what's your role in that?
Yeah, so Blue Marble Exploration is principally to study our oceans, to leverage cutting-edge science to explore places that have been rarely visited, but also to bring people along. So to create immersive imagery to allow people that can't actually accompany us into places like Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas. We can actually take you through virtual reality, augmented reality assets to experience that as well, and to also allow citizen scientists and even professional scientists to look at data sets and mine that data. So that's a very exciting part of my life. And then the other thing that I'm involved with right now is that my primary gig is as CEO of Fluidity Technologies, which is a robotics control company. It's an absolutely revolutionary way to allow us to move through physical and virtual space. Everything from drone flight controls to gaming, computer-aided design, one day even surgical robotics.
Wow, what a diversity. In your book, and I have to ask, you also mention you always wanted to go to Mars. Now we're all focused on going to the moon first, and we have our ways to get there. Why the red planet for you? Why Mars?
Well, I think it's the ultimate human destiny to set foot there. We have these amazing rovers that are doing incredible science there and orbiting platforms that are also exploring and gaining great insight. But I think it will be so instructive for us to really extend human presence to another planet, Earth 2.0, but to live off of the land, but also to do really good science there. At one point in history, there had been free-flowing water on the planet and a thin atmosphere, and so did life once exist there? Does it exist to this day, somehow buried beneath the soil? So I think it's human destiny to explore, and that's the greatest challenge out there.
It's like a lot of lessons to learn also. And then a lot of existing new space companies are planning to go there.
Yeah.
Do you think they will get there? Why or why not?
I think it's very exciting to see what Blue Origin is doing, and of course SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and all these new space companies that you really are doing bold things that were previously the purview of large government enterprise. And another reason why I'm so bullish about this day and age is because these companies are also going to be opening up space for all of us. Point-to-point space travel sounds kind of science fiction, but to be able to board a space plane at SeaTac and be I don't know, in Shenzhen, China, in 40 minutes or something like that. Sounds like science fiction, but that will happen, perhaps in the next 20 or 30 years. And so, all sorts of reasons to be excited about it.
A lot of things you've done sound like science fiction to me. I have to ask you, so you've done a lot. We all have role models ourselves. Who do you look up to still, or who did you look up to?
I had a whole pantheon of heroes that I looked up to, but I suppose the biggest of my heroes was Captain Jacques Cousteau. And he, I'm sure you've heard the name, but he invented, along with another Frenchman, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, or scuba. But he was also just a very eloquent ambassador for our oceans, and he's a great cinematographer. And so back in the day when we had VHS tapes, I had every single VHS tape of all the movies that he had taken around the world. And he allowed us to see this inner space that is so diverse and so exciting. And so for a while as a kid, I really thought seriously about becoming a marine biologist. I detoured over to this other thing, but the space stuff. But yeah, he was really one of my ultimate boyhood heroes. And then there were others. They were all explorers. So the folks that I read about as a boy all had to do with exploration. Scientists and engineers and physicians who not only were studying the extreme, but were getting out there and doing it.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool.
And in a way, it's also exploring new worlds, right?
Yeah.
It's very comparable also with what you've done in your career. So based on all your experiences and everything you've done, what could we do, or what could you say that would help us to become better versions of ourselves?
Great, a great question. Well, so I think for me, what's always worked is finding a role model who's doing something akin to what I want to do, and figure out what makes them tick, and then trying to figure out a trajectory from here to there. So, believe it or not, Boy Scouts were a great life lesson for me. When you start out as, I forget what you start out as a bobcat or something like that. You're the lowest of low, but you see this Eagle Scout award out in the far distance, and it seems dauntingly far. And all these merit badges you have to do in service projects and things. And I did this as a young kid. Instead of focusing on getting the Eagle, I focused on that next merit badge. And so I was able to sort of tease out manageable steps along the pathway to getting where I wanted to go, instead of getting discouraged by all that distance that I had to travel. I've actually seen it on Mount Everest too. I know you're a mountaineer and you've got an exciting trip ahead to Aconcagua coming up here, but people, when they arrive at a base camp to a big mountain, sometimes they'll actually look a vertical mile or two above base camp and get really discouraged, and they actually turn around and never set foot on the mountain. Wow. I saw that on Mount Everest. A couple of people, they said, "There's no way I can do that." And you know what? They're right. I mean, if you think you can do something, or you think you can't do it, you're right.
I think it's very powerful, and I think it's something we also try to apply here at Amazon. Like, we call it the working backwards approach.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, last question for you. If you look back at your life, very general, but still, is there anything you would do differently? And it's hard for me to imagine.
Well, there are other twists and turns that I could have taken. One of the things that I always was really interested in was naval aviation. And so I didn't figure out that I really wanted to maybe go into the Navy until my senior year of high school. And by then it was too late to actually apply. So that was one, I wonder what could have happened if I'd done that. But yeah, I mean, I've certainly made a number of mistakes through my life, but I've learned from them, and I think that's the most important thing. If you can be reflective and figure out ways to at least not repeat the same mistakes, and also to talk to other people and try and avoid making their mistakes, you can have a pretty wonderful life.
I can see that. So our time is running out, but I'd like to read a few paragraphs from your book before we start the Q&A. In the meantime, I don't know if any of you wants to line up in front of the microphones or to ask questions. They're on the left and the right. Okay. At 4 a.m. local time, or local Nepal time, I proudly step onto the summit, a dining room table-sized snow platform with sloping sides, and carefully sit down on a mat of wind-weathered Tibetan prayer flags. After catching my breath and giving Danuru a double fist bump, I begin to see a faint orange glow on the horizon. It's going to happen. I'm going to see the equivalent of an orbital sunrise from the summit of Everest. The sun begins to peek over the horizon, and it reminds me of my first shuttle launch. I love those moments when I was able to clearly see the curvature of the Earth and the full spectrum of lights behind the horizon. But they only lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Here atop Everest, the orbital sunrise stretches to perhaps 30 minutes, and I will soak it all in, reveling in the light and the suggestion of warmth. I know I will never forget these all too short moments at the top of the world. Wow, I think that's very powerful. That's it. I don't have any questions for you anymore, but I think the first questions are ready to be asked.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it. And you're actually a hero of mine, so
oh, thank you. That's very kind.
It's really exciting to have you out here. And I'm a mountaineer and would potentially like to climb Everest someday. So I was wondering how you even kind of started to prepare for that.
Well, it sounds like you're already well along the path because you're already a mountaineer and you're doing lots of climbing. There are, I say, 2 or 3 major areas that you have to really think about. One is the technical skill, which you obviously already have or are developing. There's the mental preparation, and that's essentially just getting comfortable with discomfort. It's the physical training, but also the mental training, the toughness that you need to kind of push through the difficult times. And then it's just apprenticeship, climbing higher and higher grades and getting ready for the challenges of Everest. Unfortunately, Everest is such a popular place now. There are some people that rush it, and I encourage everybody that I talk to make sure that you've really worked your way up and suffered your way up. Rainier and Denali and other places, such that when you finally go to Nepal, you're ready for it. But
thank you.
Good luck to you, though.
Thank you.
Good.
There's someone at number 1 also.
Oh, okay.
Hi, you mentioned that spaceflight is getting much cheaper, and we're at this inflection point where not just governments are going to be able to get to space. At the same time, satellites are getting much smaller. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about any particular science that you think is going to be really exciting, that's going to be enabled because of the confluence of these things? Well,
one area that I'm really fascinated by and hopeful for is the life sciences, and one particular area called astrobiology. It's the study of life in the extreme. And so there are 3 places in our solar system that I think are going to be really incredible to explore in some detail. There are moons of our outer gas planets, but Europa, Enceladus, Titan, these are ice-encrusted moons that have liquid underneath them and some form of geothermal or heat energy underneath. And so to somehow get to those places, get through the ice and see if there are even extant life in our own solar system, I think that's going to be one of the most extraordinary inflection points in human society when we know that we're not alone. Also, just looking at all of the exoplanets that are being discovered, thousands and thousands have been categorized now, some of which seem to be Earth-like in nature. So, what if there's another Earth? Maybe it's a million light years away or something, but just to know that life could be out there. Those are.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mike Doyle. Great to see you, Scott.
Thanks.
So as we're thinking about longer duration space missions, thinking about going to Mars, what are some of the innovations that you see as necessary to combat the effects of long duration space flight and microgravity on the human body and the human mind?
Oh, that's a great addendum that you added there, the human mind. Well, so probably the biggest threat right now is just the radiation environment. When we get outside of the Earth's Van Allen belts, the magnetic field protects us from the majority of galactic cosmic radiation and solar storms. You're really at risk of significant radiation damage and even acute radiation sickness. So spacecraft design is going to be a real challenge. I think the best way for us to really think about going to Mars in particular is to get there really quickly. And so the conventional chemical rockets that we're using today are probably not the best way to do it in the long haul. There are other types of technologies, a plasma ion transporter that could shuttle back and forth between the Earth and Mars would probably be the way to go, because we could actually shorten that time, that exposure dramatically. But the health effects of radiation are a significant concern. We've also seeing some really significant changes in vision that have cropped up in our long-duration astronauts. But the human interaction, the psychological challenges of these missions are something that really needs to be addressed as well. And I've seen it in my job overseeing healthcare in Antarctica as well. When you send people down to the South Pole Station for 9 months without any potential to get back home, there are no aircraft that can land there and take off to medically evacuate people that aren't adapting well. You really have to think very carefully about the crew composition and the psychological support. And I think it's going to be very difficult for those first pioneers that venture off to Mars. Up on the International Space Station, they can look out the window and they can see planet Earth. They see the beautiful home. They can pick up the IP phone and talk to their family. They can tweet. They can browse the web. But that's not the case when you're on your way to Mars, because there could be a 21-minute latency just in one direction. So figure out ways to support the crews on those long journeys is going to be really challenging. One of the really disruptive technologies that would really help would be optical transmission, to be able to communicate at the speed of light instead of using radio waves. But that's challenging right now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Scott.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I was hoping you could potentially talk about a time that you were at your lowest and what you did to kind of overcome that period.
Oh, great question. Well, I think the hardest time for any parent is not a threat to their own existence, but a threat to your kids' existence. I don't know how many folks here have kids, but seeing your kids struggle is gut-wrenching, and so the diagnosis of autism in my daughter was really one of those times in my life when I really felt helpless. I'm a physician, of course, but there aren't any silver bullets. There are no cures for autism as we understand it today. And of course, I studied everything I could, and I looked for any kind of magic cures, and there are all sorts of things on the web that purport to allow you to cure autism completely. None of it is of course grounded in any reality, but you really feel helpless, and you have such incredible love for your child. But what it does is it really forces you to look at the situation in a broader context. And so I really kind of chafe when I hear the term disability or special needs. When I think about my daughter Jenna, I see her as having special abilities, and she has such incredible capabilities. Granted, it's in certain focused areas, but she's great with computers. She loves music and dance, and so if you can play to her strengths, she has so much to offer society as well. So it was really kind of a gut check for me initially, but I've grown to see it as a wonderful gift.
Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. I'm curious, how do you think about managing your energy and your attention to make sure that you always have enough in the tank for all the things that you're doing? Unless that just comes naturally for you.
Well, a lot of caffeine, but well, no, I think we all excel at the things that we're passionate about, and I think if you find a vocation or projects to work on that you're really excited about, and you're excited about working with the people that you're working with, time just flies. And so I've been very fortunate to work with just some fantastic people in my career, and And so that allows me to kind of go, with lots of energy into my pursuits. If I'm not really interested in something, I'm very direct, and I'll say that probably is not something that I'd want to take part in.
Thanks.
Hey, Scott, thank you again for coming. No pun intended, you might be the most interesting man in the world. Holy smokes. I have to say that of everything that you've said today, it is remarkable the outlook and the attitude that you just have in life and anything that you approach. I'm curious, this crazy adventures that you've been on and all the stuff you've done, are there any like really standout funny moments that you think about? Like, I was working so hard all these years and then just like this one thing happened and I can't stop laughing.
Well, yeah, there's the best laugh I've ever had in my life was actually in space. I was in outer space on a spacewalk, and I talk about this in the book. This is spoiler alert, but I'll tell you the story anyway, because I actually had fire hydrants of tears of laughter coming out of my eyes. I was inside my spacesuit when this happened, but it was my mission STS-100 to the ISS. And I was out doing a spacewalk with the Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield. Has he been here?
Not here, I believe, but in Seattle he's been.
Okay.
For book signing.
Yeah. But great guy, and we were installing the Canada arm to the International Space Station. And it was a major milestone for Canada because their major contribution to the International Space Station program. And we're wrapping up our first spacewalk of the mission. And the Capcom, is the astronaut in mission control that talks to us when we're out on our missions, said, would you guys mind staying out for another 15 minutes? And, are you kidding me? Is this a trick question? Of course we'll stay out for another 15 minutes. We had no idea why we were out there, but 15 minutes in the vacuum of space, that's a pretty good gig if you don't have to do anything, especially just to kind of soak in the views. And so Chris and I were just kind of, talking back and forth. And then we realized we're about to fly over Canada. And then Steve McLean, the Capcom, starts to give a nice speech about, hey, this is a major event for Canada, and said some nice words about Chris, of course, and then he declared that I was actually an honorary Canadian citizen, which I was pretty thrilled about, actually. But then they started playing the Canadian national anthem, which is a beautiful national anthem. But our team was a little bit irreverent. We always referred to it as the hockey song. So I could see the guys. I was actually floated up by the aft flight deck windows of the shuttle, and I could see them, mouthing. And so, we were in tears laughing, but we were keeping it together as best we could. And then my friend Jeff Ashby floats over by the window with a little sign, and it just says 3 words: "Beer me hoser." and I don't know what it was. Maybe just a little punchy at the time, but from Doug and Bob McKenzie, from Saturday Night Live and SCTV fame, and I just could not hold it. And I was laughing as the Canadian national anthem was playing in the background. It was very embarrassing. And they rescinded my national status, unfortunately. So.
Thank you very much.
Wow. Yes.
Hi, Scott.
Hi.
I was going to ask a question about mental health in space, but you sort of already answered it, so now I had to come up with a new one.
Sure.
And that's, as a doctor, if you could prescribe one of your experiences to us, and only one, which one would you pick that you say, everybody has to do this, and I think you'd all be better people if you did it?
Oh, great question. I've never been asked that question, but it's really poignant, I think, today. I have spoken about this kind of concept in the past, but I think it would be really world-changing if we could fly certain world leaders in space on even just a suborbital hop. If we could get them on a Blue Origin rocket and fly over the Middle East and get warring faction leaders to fly together and look at their home from that vantage point. The notion of war would be unconscionable. It wouldn't even be possible. And similarly, for industrial giants to get a chance to see their impact on the planet, I think we could actually do a lot of good by having more people have the experience of spaceflight. It only would take a few minutes. You could have a short suborbital hop on a Blue Origin or a Virgin Galactic rocket, and a lot of good would come from that.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
You had mentioned Blue Origins and Virgin Galactic and some of the other private space entities, and you're part of private exploration. And you've been involved with NASA for such a long time. I'm curious what you envision the role of NASA going forward in an increasingly privatized world. Here at Amazon, we're pioneering technologies that were once the purview of governments.
Right.
So things are changing quite a bit. I'm curious how you feel NASA is going to be evolving in the years ahead.
Great question. Well, I think the purview of the government is to be at the leading edge, pushing objectives that can't be afforded by private industry. So we're sort of at I guess it's sort of the barnstorming era of commercial human spaceflight. It's a really exciting time. But I think NASA should be looking for far off, big, bold objectives. I think we should be really seriously looking at developing a lunar outpost, I think, is a staging area, and also to learn from that, such that we would then be able to set sail for Mars and move there permanently for science. So I'm hopeful that there will be an articulated vision for space in the next year or so that we will stick with. The problem with our space policy in this country is that with each successive presidential administration, they have to put their new stamp on it, and it's very slow, and it's not resulted in a lot of progress towards Mars. I think the first President Bush actually said, "Hey, we're going to go to Mars." Well, then I forget. Clinton actually had his focus primarily on the International Space Station, but then second Bush said we're going to the moon first, and then Obama had us targeting an asteroid, which really wasn't all that compelling a mission. But each time we kind of change direction, we lose ground, and I think there just needs to be a long-range plan that we stick with.
Hey, one of our colleagues joining us on the live stream wanted to ask, what social changes would you anticipate if and when space travel becomes cheap and common?
I think it's an extension of what's already happening to our planet. Almost planetary access to the web. It's really kind of shrunk the world. It's reduced the barriers to entry for business and allowed us to collaborate much better. So I think the ability for us to travel physically using point-to-point space travel is going to be the next quantum leap in that. But I guess contrary to that, as the virtual reality and augmented reality tools get better and better, maybe we won't travel as much anymore. Maybe the representations of distant places will be so great we won't actually need to go there. We can just sort of virtually teleport there.
I'm not sure if I would like that.
Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah.
I think there's no questions left. It's perfect timing. Also, Scott said he was so nice to stay a little longer and sign all of the books. So
I'd be happy to sign your books if you'd like.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we can all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.